what's going on YouTube? It's me, Jeffrey, and today we're doing another creepypasta. Today we're doing a Yoshi story / Yoshi's Island creepypasta called Marisa's Story. So, yeah, let's get to this. When I was attending university, my roommate Taylor and I were almost inseparable. We shared similar tastes in just about everything, which I suppose is why college dorm life went on without a hitch. Taylor and I were ravenous fans of Nintendo games, spending all of our free time with his Super Nintendo playing through the Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario titles. Well, life carried on for both of us. He went on to some video game design with some relatively low-key American developer, and I went on to my writing. Just recently, some sad news came to my way. Taylor had committed suicide via an aspirin overdose. It came as a shock to me, thinking that the chipper and eccentric man I once knew could take in such a turn. But a lot could happen in the better half of 2 decades. We hadn't spoken in years, and the part of me wished that I would have kept in touch. Maybe I could have helped him. In any case, Taylor lacked many close relatives aside from his sister and his parents, both incredibly old and feeble. I got along well with his sister for almost as long as I knew Taylor, and she asked to help me move his things out of the house. I went along attempting to do the decent thing and help her out. As in an overcast September afternoon, I arrived at his house. The house looked almost too large for an A1 man, which is confounding as his sister knew of nobody else lodging with him. And Taylor always seemed to be preferring snug urban abodes to his quiet home on the outer suburbs. Inside, the house's many rooms had fallen into disrepair and surfaces caked with a uniform coating of dust. It looked as if no rooms had been used save for a small study stacked with computers and file cabinets. His kitchen and the living room he had haphazardly converted to double as a bedroom. I found it curious that he seemed to avoid traveling up to the second floor altogether, a assumption supported by the same unbroken dust on the stairs. Packing was a breeze, with the little clutter Taylor had lying about. Amazingly, I had found a small box tucked in the corner of his living room containing that old treasure trove of Super Nintendo titles that we ever played. Alas, any of the nostalgia I could have held was soured by the poignant realization that Taylor was gone. That this hollowed memory I had was made sad and incomplete by his untimely end. I was once again haunted by the sheer confusion of why he would do this, not telling anyone or reaching out for help. I worked past the sadness and anger, forcing myself to close up the cardboard flaps of the box and carry them out to the trailer we had hitched to his sister's truck. His sister, when faced with the game, simply insisted that I take them. Nobody else had any use for the things, and she felt out of the people Taylor knew that he wanted me to have them. She gave me the Super Nintendo Entertainment System games, as well as the second box of games for the PC. I accepted them begrudgingly. I had no intent of playing them for fear of having a breakdown once the full brunt of his death hit me, but at least it was something I could do, I suppose. Bringing the boxes home, I sighed to myself in exhaustion, sitting alongside my relatively meager collection of Wii games. My preoccupation with my writing made me less and less of a fervent gamer, so almost all my titles were casual games or kid games for my nephews during their visits. For days, they had barely crossed my mind as I carried on my work, but one night in particular, my curiosity simply piqued at the thought, what was in the other box of games? Opening it, I saw games like Roller Coaster Tycoon and the old Quake games mingling with games like Crysis and Bioshock. I thought they all looked fairly neat, though many would have been simply too taxing for my computer. It was then I saw it, a small blue USB thumb drive tucked into the corner of the box, as it was fallen between the cracks of the other games. Boxes and dug into this small niche. I assumed it was for any game he had no physical storage for, given all the memory dedicated to his game development work. My curiosity drove me even further. I dared plug the thumb drive into my PC. On it, it was simply a Super Nintendo emulator and a file named Marisa's Story. Must have been some kind of game he couldn't get a physical copy of. Perhaps a rare game or some not released in the US. I booted up the game after putting in the time to move the files onto my PC so they could run properly. What I was welcomed with was the opening of Yoshi's Story. This perplexed me because I could have sworn I already saw a copy of the game in the box of Super Nintendo titles. Pressing on, I adjusted myself to the unfamiliar WASD keyboard setup. I'm by no means a PC gamer, mind you, and I selected one of the 3 new files. The game started me off with a typical level select screen, forgoing the introductory level altogether. I selected the first stage and started. The game appeared unchanged, except for the fact that every bottomless pit was covered up with blocks. I could not break, so I could only die from contact with an enemy and losing Baby Mario for too long. I also noticed I was on my last life, so I felt compelled not to allow Baby Mario from straying too far. Upon swallowing an enemy, I found that I could not lay eggs with them, so I had to make do with spinning enemies at obstacles in style of throwing eggs. As I kept playing, I also noticed the same color scheme was strangely more pastel and washed out. And between the levels, my Yoshi never changed colors but stayed the same green color. I progressed surprisingly easy through the next few levels. I remember playing bits of Yoshi's story when I was younger, and I remember it very little. I could tell things were off. The enemies seemed slow, rare, and harmless. Some, like the chain chomps, were absent altogether, with the few I faced hardly causing me any problems. Mario's cries when I got hit sounded like even more shrill and grating than usual, layered with a harsh computerizing droning, as if it was damaging my speakers to play them. The game color scheme was also pulsed back and forth between soft pastel tones and harsh orange hue at the pace reminiscent of a pounding heartbeat. I cannot put my finger on it, but getting hit made me feel exceptionally anxious. The unsettling noise and abrupt change in atmosphere spurred me to rush as quickly as I could to get Mario back, which was no easy task given my lack of eggs. One way or another, I pressed onto the final level before Bert the Bashful's fort and was met by another Yoshi. This time the other Yoshi, an odd magenta color one, had Mario and ran slightly ahead of me, following what looked like a preset path to the end of the stage. While she had avoided the good majority of the enemies by jumping a swallow or spinning them as I had done before, it appeared this other Yoshi lacked eggs as well. She would occasionally get hit, spurring that same awful sequence. Both myself and this other Yoshi would pursue the baby, but he would always travel to the other Yoshi when retrieved. After completing what seemed like a escort mission after an extremely long time, I started off on Bert's fort. While the level title came out normally, I started by what followed. The colors had gone from their very pale palette to a darker one. It almost resembled the color of the normal game, but everything was darker as if in shadow. The stage was comprised of collapsing blue rocks, and the background was a stormy sky. I still did not have Baby Mario with me, but the other Yoshi was nowhere in sight. The normal fortress theme droned on, but as if it seemed to carry an odd sense of urgency, as if something was wrong. The tempo had increased almost to match the same rhythm as the orange pulses when Mario was in his bubble. I pressed Yoshi to run as quickly as possible. I finally reached the end of the stage, and at the end, there was the magenta Yoshi and Baby Mario. Kamek flew overhead and delivered his usual spiel. However, the text was different this time. "You were too late. This is your fault." He flew back and forth across the screen, but he didn't drop any particles of magic this time. He just flew off. The game was playing that same musical jingle as he powers up an enemy into the fortress boss, but there was no boss, just a screen shaking. It was then I realized that the rock, the magenta Yoshi, and Baby Ron was falling. I was still immobile for the cutscene. I had no choice but to watch they play off the screen. I heard Baby Mario's cries still droning and horrific, but they were gradually went quiet as the screen went dark. I was back at the level select screen, but the music had stopped and all the levels I had been were locked up as if I hadn't gone to them yet. I played the only level I couldn't enter the strange second act of the level. Every color was muted almost to grayscale, and the sound seemed distant and muted. My Yoshi was now gray. His sprite was edited, his face looking drawn out and weary. His head was lower than usual, his whole body sunken down, carrying an immense burden. Baby Mario was once again on his back, but details like his eyes were etched out, leaving what looked like an almost inanimate thing shaped like a baby. Yoshi moved slower now, and enemies were back to their normal difficulty. When Yoshi was hit, however, the baby didn't go up in the bubble, and simply fell limp to the ground. No crying whatever, no star mirror, nothing. You could pick up the thing when you please, and it would simply reappear on Yoshi's back when I touched it. I noticed that without Yoshi moved normally, but The screen would no longer scroll, forcing me to pick it back up. Whenever it seemed they would go over into the bottomless pit, it simply stopped midair and landed on the end of whatever platform it was on, giving me no means of a game over. After slugging through a few levels of this morbid version of the game, I got to the castle. The castle's tiles completely blank now, but the level itself would play normally. My strange fake baby Mario once again avoided descending into pits or pools of lava, and I finally reached the boss room. This time the boss room was totally empty except for what looked like an egg block. Its green spots replaced with a glitchy mess of pixels. The boss's room background also contained a lot of abnormalities, with messes of pixels scattered around. Kamek returned, this time saying this: "Now you can hurt the one responsible. It's time to face punishment." He once again flew back and forth without emitting any magic at all, and there was no boss theme, just the mere noise of Baby Mario crying incessantly at times it seemed to fade between almost inaudible to disturbingly clear, as if Mario should be on the screen. Unfortunately, there was nothing to do but spur the egg block to dispense its contents. The eggs looked odd. They didn't have spots, and instead of being egg-shaped, they were simple uniform ovals of an off-white color. Growing frustrated and with nothing left to do but see what happened, I began to throw the eggs at the walls. They bounced back and forth several times until one hit the Yoshi. He flashed abruptly and the screen went a bit darker. I did this a few more times until the screen went black. Yoshi went into an animation of him spinning and kneeling over, and the game went dark. Immediately after, the game crashed, refusing to be run again despite my best efforts. I couldn't help but wonder what it meant. Why would Taylor play such a hard game? This couldn't have been what drove him over the edge, could it? I went back to his sister as soon as I could and asked her if she knew anyone by the name of Marisa. She looked distant and sad for a moment before reflecting back. Marisa was Taylor's fiancée a few years ago. They were engaged to be married, and Marisa was even pregnant with a child. One day, Taylor and her got into an argument, and she drove out. There was a traffic accident shortly after, and both Marisa and the child both passed away. Taylor was never the same since. I began to figure out that the guilt was too much for him. He kept working and living, but he wasn't himself anymore. It hit me like a train. Taylor designed the game inside and out as a look into his own life, his guilt, and his death. It was a suicide note in its own twisted way. Taylor was focusing all his rage and pain into programming that terrible thing. The first act was a dream sequence, a perfect world of pastels and simplicity broken only by the fear of losing his child. The fourth was the night of Marisa's death, and the last levels were the years leading up to Taylor's death. A long, painful hardship and isolation. I thanked the sister for her time and apologized for the intrusion. She said it was fine and that she was glad to get off her chest. I regret not being there for him, not helping him. I wish I would have known, would have stayed close. Maybe he would have been okay. I guess there's no point in complaining about why I cannot change. If I stay clinging to the past, it might slowly eat away at me as it did to him. All I could really do is move forward now. I hope all you reading this won't hesitate to take some time to stay connected to old friends so this might not happen again. Well, that was morbid as hell. Now, aside this, I kind of like how there was no blood cliche in this story. However, it does have a pretty sad ending, stating of the whole story of how Taylor designed the game inside and out of his own life to a suicide note. That's kind of sad, actually. Yeah, this is a creepypasta that doesn't have the blood cliches, but overall it does show a kind of story that shows from the climax. It builds up a good climax, but overall it's a good story. And the climax is it builds up from the first act, from the nice happy world of pastels, and then it goes to the second act in the perfect way that does not escalate the whole thing with using the blood or gore. Creepypastas can use blood and gore and stuff like that as long as it's used correctly, and so far this story didn't need that whatsoever. Just a creepy experience of playing this game and looking into the lives of another person before they died. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this creepypasta, and which one do you want me to read next? This is Jeffrey Sambursky signing out, and remember, stay close and stay connected to your own friends, new and old. Stay safe, everyone.